Jill, we often hear that story structure is easy and that it doesn't require much effort. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, I think it's to get the right structure for your story, that's 90% of the work. Is it easy to do that? Well, it depends on how good you are with story structure, but it's everything, right? I mean, I obviously was not the first person to say this, but story is structure. And to get it right is all the difference between a story being effective and not being effective, or drawing us in or boring us. Like that's what it is. I had people have a real, or some people have a real hang up about the idea of structure. Like even the word seems to offend them. And I was at a party one time where I ran into a student of mine, and she introduced me to a famous documentary filmmaker who I'm not going to name, and introduced me as her teacher who wrote this book on story structure. And his attitude to me was a little bit like, structure, smucture, And I was amused, and I said, well, let me understand something. For your documentary films, do you just stick a camera on one person and like have them talk for an hour and a half without any edits, no cuts? And he said, of course not. We employ editing, we have B-roll, we do all these things to tell a story. And I said, well, if you're employing editing and a B story and B-roll, you're employing structure. That's all structure is. It's the events that you choose to show in the order you choose to show them in. That's all it means. So, I mean, it constitutes, I think, 90% of the work. Now, how much you're going to put into it or how long that takes you, it really depends. So many people come to me and they say, structure is my weakness. And I say, well, you came to the right place because structure is my strength. I'm really good at that. But it's a really good skill for all writers to understand. Because once you have the structure, like that's the maybe not as fun part, but it's the scaffolding that makes it easy to write your script. If you know the structure, it's no problem writing the script. It shouldn't be a problem. You're not going to have the issue that so many people have where they're halfway through and they run out of steam. I hear that all the time, right? People get to page 60, they peter out. You're not going to peter out if you have good story structure to begin with, where you know where you're going. It's gonna support the whole thing.
And then most writers, I would imagine, maybe I'm wrong, are right brain people, and it seems like structure is a very left brain activity. And really you can't, what is the saying, you can't sort of break the rules until you know the rules?
Exactly. I mean, I guess I'm a rule person, or it was easy for me. I was eager to learn the rules in order to break the rules. I think I'm a bit of a mix of the left and the right, and so that's why structure is a lot easier to me than it is a lot of writers. I still do some writing. The writing's really hard for me, but structure's easy. Like it's become intuitive to me at this point that I can pretty quickly pick out what's working, what's not, and tell you why not. And that's structure. That's how I know these things. I can see you're picking a choice in your climax that I saw coming from the very beginning. And let's find you a different choice. Those are the kinds of things that we can do with structure, and when you have a firm grasp on that, it just makes the storytelling so easy.
Why do you say that 75% of screenwriters' creative effort should go toward structure?
Because structure is everything. It's going to make your life easy. What we're doing with structure, particularly when I'm using my method, my nutshell technique method, is I'm setting up things, helping you set up some things that happen in the beginning and that happen in the end. And those things aren't random. They're connected. And if we set them up properly, it does all the heavy lifting of holding up your story, holding up the bulk of your story, which is the middle, the second act, which is twice as long as the first act or the third act, it's twice as long. But if we have the right structure, it's going to hold it up, even though I don't have any structural elements really in the second act, as long as we found the right elements. And so, that's why I am a big proponent in putting the time in advance to figuring out the structure. Let's figure it out. A lot of writers don't. They just write. And that's the way to discover the story. And, that's okay as long as you are going to be happy with being told maybe you have to throw out a draft because you didn't discover till the end of it. It was like, oh, actually, I should have maybe started the story towards the end and gone further instead of exploring those kinds of things. I'm not that kind of person. I can't stand writing additional drafts. And so I just think it's easier. We can set up these things to understand the structure without writing a single page. And in fact, it's easier to do it that way because it's, my form is a one-page nutshell technique form that, we could see right on the form what's working and what's not. And if it's not, it's really easy to fix because it's on one piece of paper. When you have written 120 pages, it's a mess to fix it. So, that's why I say get that work out of the way in the beginning. The other stuff's easy.
Sure, and it's almost like a game of Jenga or dominoes that if you take one little piece, the rest of it will collapse. So
exactly.
It's not just that easy.
Yeah, or even if you have a vague idea of what your structure is, like you said, it's, one piece can make it collapse. You get in a certain way and you realize, oh, this isn't actually working the way I thought it was. And but now you've written yourself halfway through, and do you want to go back to the drawing board? A lot of people don't.
And what do you say to students that, I know you do in-person classes and Zoom, I think?
I do Zoom classes, and I do everything on Zoom now, actually, my classes and my consultation.
What do you say, though, to students that say, you know what, this is taking all the joy out of writing. I am an artist. I want to create and just I want to bleed on the page.
Yeah. I think that the first thing I would say if they were a student of mine would be, first of all, I want you to try it my way. Right? You've signed up for this class. This is, class is about the nutshell technique. I want you to try it my way. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised that, in fact, it's freeing. It's not constrictive. It sounds very constrictive to those who don't understand structure. And it may feel that way at first. I know people feel like they're, shoehorning things fitting them into my boxes. But once you have a structure, figured out, you can, I exaggerated a little bit, but it's like 8 words on a Post-it, essentially, you can stick on your monitor, and then you write with the joy, and you're not going to write yourself into a corner. You can trust that you've done the heavy lifting, you've done the heavy thinking, and figured out the structure already. And so now you can have joy on the page. Now this, as the scenes come alive, I don't have to worry about, oh, am I writing myself into a corner? I've already figured that out. I can live and breathe on the page along with the characters. So it's, it's forcing you to think about those things up front. It's forcing you to think about really what your story is about. That's what it is. I mean, a story is not just a bunch of events after each other, right? Or a premise that you're not sure where it goes. A story is going to impact us, and it has meaning, and it's not likely you're going to randomly come across that meaning. And so I think it's really worth investing the time up front to figure out the structure. And by the way, I use a very loose sense of it. I don't use a beat sheet approach. I don't tell you have to hit all these pre-prescribed beats. I have a couple of things that are grounded in linear time. I mean, you have to have a first scene, you have to have a last scene. There's something that happens at 25%, and there's something that happens at 75%. But other than that, my elements of structure are not linear. It's not about time. It's about the connection between these 4 things. And so if you figure that out in advance, then you're going to be able to have joy in the page. Then you're not going to have anxiety in the page, or end up writing 140 pages that end up being a long situation that doesn't really have a point to it. You've already figured out what the story is about ahead of time. And so now you can experience the joy of letting the characters come alive.
How is the nutshell technique different from Blake Snyder's Save the Cat?
Well, I'm not an expert on Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. I'm familiar with it. I've read the book. Obviously, one of still I think the best-selling book on screenwriting. So the approach, as far as his beat sheet approach, is that you're supposed to hit so many pre-prescribed beats, right, that are ostensibly in every Hollywood movie. And I don't have any problem with that. I have lots of writers who use my method and use Save the Cat. They don't contradict each other. They're just different approaches. Save the Cat's beat sheet is just linear. We're going to hit these 15, I can't remember if it's 15 or 22 beats that are in every Hollywood story. Blake Snyder's method and a lot of other beat sheet methods tend to get people too quickly micromanaging things, micromanaging moments. And my method, the nutshell technique, is more about a bird's eye view. We're looking back. So I'm not looking at every single, it doesn't go into every single beat. What we're doing is we're setting up certain things in Act 1 and in Act 3, and then the glue that connects all that. And so it's helping the writer figure out what their story is about, not every little thing that happens. A story is not just a series of a bunch of things happening. It adds up to something. So there's a danger of using those methods where you can end up with what I call a situation instead of a story, because it doesn't deal with those concepts. But if someone likes it, they don't contradict each other. If someone wants something beyond my method, they like the nutshell technique approach to story and understanding an overview, but then they feel a little lost because I tell them, I don't have any pre-prescribed moments in Act 2 for you, and that's kind of overwhelming to people. Like, that's the scariest act. Now, I maintain you don't need to have that, as long as if we've set things up properly in Act 1 and Act 3, it does all the heavy lifting to support Act 2, even though Act 2 is twice as long. I don't need a pre-prescribed beat. As long as I keep throwing obstacles at the protagonist, that's essential. You have to keep throwing problems at them. But you don't need a pre-prescribed beat per se. But people are welcome to use both methods.
Sure, if we look at Sideways, which is a movie I love, it's not just a road trip movie with one character that sort of is lost in life, and the other one who seemed to somehow magically everything just comes his way. There's different things that are happening at all times that are kind of stating who the characters are.
Yeah, the story, right, is about Miles getting to a place in the end of realizing that he should be active and make, instead of always letting life happen to him and not making the bold moves like his friend does, that in fact he should be put himself out there. And that's the story. The plot are all the individual funny things and tragic things that happen along the way, right? The drinking of the wine out of the spit bucket. All of those things are great, but they are elements that build up this overall story of this one man's journey, right? From somebody who has no confidence in himself and to someone who can have confidence in who he is, even though he hasn't published a book. Look, the woman of his dreams appreciates him and his work despite that fact and is moved by it. Right? So he doesn't need to be like his friend in finding the change in himself. It's about a deep down confidence that he's just, that has been, I think also because of his divorce, affected him, and he has, lost his confidence.
Why are Acts 1 and Act 3 so important to a story?
All of the acts, of course, are important, right? But the structurally speaking, Act 1 and Act 3 are super important because we're setting up the right setup in Act 1, and then Act 3 is our resolution. And a bunch of critical things are happening here. That we're seeing a character in the first act have a want that they're going to achieve, and then they're either going to keep that want in the end, and then they have what I call a tragic story, probably. They're actually going to have a sad ending, because in life, it's not what you want, it's what you need. And the character, if they've held on to this want, they're not really addressing the thing that they needed to get. And so we're going to find out that tragic aspect in the third act. And so structurally, that's where the important pieces are. Act 2, which is traditionally called, actually Aristotle called it the complication, right? Which is, reminiscent of a lot of plot synopses you've seen. This happens and then complications ensue, right? And so it's the product of the things we set up in Act 1. So we set up all this stuff, and so now it's playing out in Act 2. So it's not that Act 2 isn't important, but it's set up in Act 1. We're setting up who the character is, who needs to be tested by the particular journey. The journey is the middle part. Interestingly, what people think about as being the guts of a story is the second act, like an audience, like they, that a movie like Sideways is about two friends going to wine country and complications ensue, right? That's what people think of as a movie being. It's whatever we set up at the end of Act 1 is then testing that character through Act 2. But that's not really what the story is about. What the story's really about is about a man who's lost his confidence, who's been unable to act in daring ways, learning to discover that, right? And so that's set up by seeing a guy in the beginning who is ineffective and is a liar a lot of the times and wants people to believe he's got a book coming out when, at the same time he's really unsure that anything's going to happen with it. And then in the third act of him finally coming into his own after hitting a rock bottom and daring to open that expensive bottle of wine that he had been holding on forever, in the third act. So all the acts are important, but structurally speaking, the things that we're setting up exist in Act 1 and Act 3. And if we set them up correctly with the right glue, it's going to do all the heavy lifting of supporting Act 2, even though Act 2 is twice as long and does not contain any structural elements. The way I like to think about Act 2 is that Act 1, at the very end of it, we've had what I call the point of no return, this big event that's going to push the story in a different direction that the character doesn't expect, and that's going to challenge them throughout Act 2. And so as long as we set up the right one, and there's a bunch of criteria for getting a good point of no return, but set up so that it's causing a major problem for the protagonist that they're going to have to deal with in Act 2. We don't need any other structure. So Act 2 is really about having this point of no return that comes with this big catch, which is a problem they're going to have to deal with throughout Act 2. And then the only other element is that I tell writers, you want to keep throwing obstacles at the character. Just keep throwing obstacles. You got to make sure they don't enjoy themselves, even for a second, right? That just constantly throw problem after problem. But that's not the same thing as those like critical structural elements that were in Act 1 and Act 3. So Act 1 and Act 3 have the critical structural elements, and Act 2 is more about obstacle after obstacle, once you presented them with what the story's going to be about, keeping them from being happy.
Right, and if I remember correctly, in Sideways, does Miles and Thomas Hayden Church character, they go to Miles's mom's house? Is that still in Act 1? I'm not quite sure. And you really see, I'm not sure if there's mention of money being loaned, when are you paying it back? And I think he takes money, and you kind of really see like how desperate this character is.
Yeah. right? Whereas it's the setup. We see he's a loser, right? We see, I mean, everything in Act One is backing that up. You know, from the moment where, and he's also a liar too, that like, you know, he tells his friend, you know, he overslept because he was hungover, and his friend is like, you know, where are you? Where are you? And he's like, yeah, I'll be there in a moment. And then cut to, he's sitting on the toilet reading a book. Like, he's just full of it. And then he complains, oh, it was traffic. It was traffic. That's why I'm late. You know, so he's full of lies. He's full of ways he's trying to cover his insecurities about who he is. And I've got a friend who's, you know, a famous-ish person, and I'm the schlubby loser friend, and I'm trying to deal with that. And yeah, we see him steal money from his mother and all those things, right? That's the setup of identifying who the character is, who they are, before this big event's going to happen that's going to change them and change his life.
Lastly, you've said about how you want the character to feel very uncomfortable about themselves. Throughout the entire trip, he's reminded of things, whether it's overtly or covertly, whether it's his own insecurity or someone tells him, yeah, you know, they make an off-cuff remark about looks or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
he's uncomfortable the entire time.
Yeah. You know, his inability to make a move on Maya, the love interest, the first time, even though it's an obvious time, right? All these things. And then also seeing it illustrated in his friend's casualness with this affair he picks up, and the drama that comes with it that's so natural, and it doesn't even bother him almost, even though he gets, you know, beat up by it. And actually, and Miles gets drawn into it too.
Jill, did I hear you correctly that you don't actually enjoy doing rewrites, or that it's sort of a pet peeve?
Does anybody enjoy doing rewrites? I mean, I think some people do, but it's the, and I certainly will, I will do as many drafts as I have to. I mean, I've been involved with a project recently as a co-writer, and, you know, we're up to the 20th draft or so. I mean, rewrites are part of it, right? You know, writing is rewriting, but it's not my favorite part of it. It's a part that I'm going to procrastinate probably, because I know it means throwing out things, right? Killing some of your darlings. It may mean doubting the underlying structure. It's just not a particularly pleasant process. So I like to get it as much of the story captured in the first draft. Is the first draft going to be perfect? No, they're never perfect. They're not meant to be perfect. You're going to have to do rewrites. But I don't want to do 16 rewrites. I want to help someone find as complete a structure as possible, and that they feel solid about, so they feel that they've understood their story, and now they can feel that they're pretty confident about the draft, even though, sure, if it's the first draft, of course it's going to need a rewrite. But it's not my favorite part of the process, right? I think most writers, the first draft is the fun part. It's the other part. It's like, oh, I got to do another rewrite. So just trying to minimize that, and particularly since the part that I think I'm really trying to minimize is that a lot of writers come to me, and you know, once I talk with them in a consultation, they agree with my points that I make, but the points may mean they have to throw out 2 acts, you know. I would hate to get that advice. You know, if someone told me you're going to have to throw out your first 2 acts, I would be like, I don't know that I'm going to continue with this project. Now, the writers I work with tend to be fine with it. They're like, well, that's my process. I write drafts. I'm used to it. It doesn't bother me. And I was like, okay, if it doesn't bother you, but they agree. Yep, you're right. I should have started the story later, and so I'll just throw that out, and I'll start from there. But I always find it painful to even give that as advice, because I certainly wouldn't want to be told you got to throw out your first 2 acts.
What is the 8 sequence method?
So the 8 sequence method is the structuring method I use after my nutshell technique. So instead of using one of the beat sheet methods that are out there, and all we're doing, the 8 sequence method has been around supposedly since the beginning of film. I'm yet to see the visual proof of it, but supposedly early scripts were actually divided in 8 sequences, that each sequence was from a different roll of film. basically. So each reel was a different sequence. And what I like about it is I'm just breaking it into more manageable bites. So again, I'm not getting into individual beats, but the beginning of Act 1 and the end of Act 1 have a different feel. And so that's why it's sequence 1 and sequence 2. And so basically all we're doing is we're breaking it up into roughly 15-minute or 15-page sequences. So Act 1 becomes 2 15-minute sequences, sequence 1 and sequence 2. Act 2 becomes 4 15-minute sequences. And then Act 3 is 1 15-minute sequence, and then that sequence 8 is actually just a 5-minute, because the last sequence is just basically one scene. And so, particularly when we're looking at that second act of the 60 pages that are so overwhelming, and everybody gets stuck about the middle, it's going to be real helpful to, instead of thinking about, this problem in Act 2, it's like, well, this problem in my sequence 5, right? When you get the problem may not be the entire Act 2, it's this one sequence, right? And another thing I like about using sequences is I have my writers in my classes, I have them, they submit beat sheets for critique, to divide them into 8 sequences. And I tell them to title each of the sequences. And it's a little bit like those old, if you remember, DVD chapter titles, right? It's kind of a hint of what's to come. And it's an exercise that I like because, first of all, if you're having a hard time naming your sequence, and the naming is a little bit like if each sequence was its own short film, what would you call it? And if you're having trouble naming it, that points to maybe a lack of cohesion, right? That maybe it's a little too all over the place. Maybe you need to have your getting ready for the heist beats all in sequence 3 and move your love interest to not start, till the very end of that, right? It kind of helps you isolate these things. For someone like me who's used the 8 sequence method, and it's been around, like I said, predates me, predates all the screenwriting books, actually, and it's a method that's been taught throughout the years at a couple of universities. And the other reason I like them to title the sequences is it's a really nice shorthand. So, today you're gonna do some writing. What am I gonna work on? I look at my beat sheet and I say, I'm gonna work on sequence 4. Everybody grows to hate him, or whatever the title is, and it's just easy for me to remember what this 15 pages is about and give it some coherence.
Is it a coincidence that the nutshell technique is also 8 elements?
It is. It is a coincidence. There's no one-to-one correspondence to them, because remember, the nutshell technique is basically just things in the act in Act 1 and Act 3, and then we have one element that's right at the end of Act 2. But I don't go into that, and that's why it kind of works nice with it. If people feel like they need something beyond, that just working with a nutshell alone feels too scary, that they need a little bit more, they're used to a beat sheet method, or they need a little bit more structure, then I think 8 sequences is a nice way to break things down, so you're not intimidated when you face the big, scary 60 pages that make up Act 2. It's like, no, I'm working on sequence 3, which is 15 pages. It's not so scary.
In your classes or with just other things in the screenwriting realm, have you seen new writers give up because they just felt that their Act 2 was unsatisfying, or they were frustrated?
A lot of people have come to me because of that. A lot of people have not been able to figure out why is it that I lost steam? Why is it that, I felt so exciting, I had such a great setup, and then it just kind of petered out. And so I hopefully am giving them the solutions, I'd like to think, where that won't happen. If you set things up properly in Act 1 and Act 3, that shouldn't happen. I strongly maintain that, and I think you've heard this expression before, that, the problem in your third act is in your first act. Right? These things are very related. And actually your problem in your Act 2 probably has to do with the fact that you don't know your first act and your third act. You don't know You don't know where you're coming from, and you don't know where you're going to. If we know those things, it can hopefully get you through Act Two. So yeah, I've had a lot of people have come to me just because of that. That's a very common problem, right? That people write, and I think that's one of the dangers of writing blindly, of like, you know your setup, but you don't know your ending. If you don't really know your story, if all you know is your setup, if you don't know your ending.
Should screenwriters write character profiles or biographies?
So in my opinion, writers can do whatever they like. If that's helpful for them, go for it. I don't do them. I don't like them. I don't have any of my writers do them. I am not aware of all my professional screenwriters who are clients. I'm not aware of one of them that does that. I have a client who has his movies everyone here has heard of, and he does biopics, and his philosophy is he writes the story first and then he does the research. He doesn't even want to be distracted by extraneous details about someone's life. But he basically goes with like a nutshell idea of what this person's life represented to him. When he heard about this person's life, like what got him excited, what sounds like the story of their life, because a life is not inherently a story. So what was the story in there that got him excited? Basically sort of a Wikipedia level of understanding, and then get away from the facts, write the story, write the emotional part of what fascinated him about this character, and then he does research to fill in the details, right? He doesn't even want to be distracted. And I absolutely know writers who have done too much research, that it gets in the way of you being able to tell a story if you know too much. So I don't like them. To me, characters are what they do, not who they were. So for me, 90% of character development is going to be in my nutshell technique method, right? It is, who is this character? What does this person want? What is this person's flaw? And now I'm going to figure out what would be the journey to best test these elements. To me, character development and plot are not two different things. They're intrinsically related. They're intrinsically tied together. So that's why I find character profiles kind of frustrating, because we're talking an abstract idea about what this person's favorite color is. I've seen these lists that my students have told me of. I had 120 questions I had to answer, from a previous professor who said, I need to know what kind of car they drive, and all these things. Those are just abstract, kind of making stuff up, right? As opposed to, let's see the character in action, and then that's going to help define who they are. So they have a want, they have multiple wants, they have flaws. So then I want to design what is the best journey to bring out and test this character. So I'm going to have a big event happen at the 25% mark. I call the point of no return, and that's not an arbitrary event. It is an event I've specifically designed to test this character, right? Another character wouldn't work. I want my journey to be unique to this character. This journey is uniquely testing this character. Another person might not react to that point of no return. It might not be a big deal. I'm going to pick one that is a big deal to the character, and how they react to it, that reveals character. Like we say in life, you can tell someone's true character in a crisis. It's the same thing. We can tell a character's true nature by what they do in the face of obstacles. And so the nutshell is a big part of that. We're going to, what choices are they going to make? And the choices they make are telling us who that character is and who they are becoming. And beyond that, I really recommend writers brainstorm an obstacle list And so what I love about an obstacle list is it's not a commitment. You're not committing to anything. You can make up anything you want. It's just a list separate of everything else. And you take a shower, you think of a couple new obstacles, get out, add it to your list. Just keep adding obstacles to your list. And then when we get to Act 2 and we don't have maybe as much structure and you're running out of ways to test our character, let's look over to the obstacle list. Let's put this obstacle here, see what happens. So how they react to the obstacle reveals their character to me. And then beyond that, I think of the rest of character development. I like to think of it as spackle. It's like you don't want a lot of spackle because that, everything's going to collapse. Just the tiniest amount of spackle I can get away with to fill in the cracks. So once I start writing and my character's dealing with her coworkers in her office in New York, I'm going to have to make some choices beyond what I've already established in the nutshell, which again is 95% of the character development. But I'm going to have to make some other choices. Like, is she a native New Yorker, or did she move here from across the country or the suburbs? I mean, that might affect how she talks and how she relates to her coworkers. And so maybe I'll decide off the cuff. I think she's from Connecticut. She's from Connecticut, maybe upper middle class. That's going to affect why she's a little condescending to some of her New York native coworkers, right? Little choices like that. It's probably not even going to come out, right? But if, basically, if you were to ask me, well, where's your protagonist from? If I made up, if I answered Chicago and I said it in such a way you were convinced that I knew that, then I've done my job, even though I made that up on the top of my head. But I made it up on the basis of these other things I know about her. I'm just adding this little bit of spackle. I want maybe someone who's from Chicago, right? So just a little bit here and there. I don't want to overload it. Because again, characters are not their backstory. They're who they are in the present. And we see it by what they do in the present. And there are a couple of dangers. I tell my writers, some people really like them and are attached to them. And I say, go ahead, use them. I'm not saying you can't use them. I'm just saying you don't have to use them with me. But I do want you to be aware of some of the dangers of them. And if any of these happening, maybe you need to reconsider using character profiles. That people start getting locked into the way that they think the story needs to go based on these preconceived ideas about who the character is, even though they just made up an arbitrary character profile, right? But they've gotten attached to, no, she's from Iowa, she did this, and all of a sudden that makes your story inflexible, even though these little biographical facts aren't adding anything. You're attached to it because you have this idea that that's who the character is, even though those things aren't important. There's the danger of exposition, that you feel like you have to tell us all these things you figured out. You're going to have to drop in, these little things that you've created as far as the character profile. And then the last problem is, and probably the worst one, is procrastination. I see this particularly with people writing biopics, where they say, I'm not ready to write the story enough yet because I haven't done enough research. And my response is almost always, you have done too much research. You need to stop doing research. You're never going to write the story. The more you research, the more you're going to find out things that are going to confuse you and contradict it. And instead of looking at, we're not writing a book report here of this person's life. It's a story, right? You need to look big picture. What was important about their story, and stop getting distracted by little details. When it comes to research, I like to say Wikipedia and be done, right? That's it. You just need a snapshot of who that person is. Now fill it. What got you excited when you read that Wikipedia page? What got your mind working? Write a story around that. Let me give you, if I may, an example of a character profile, okay? All right, so this is a man, he's an Italian man. He's good looking, he's tall, he's handsome, but he's a little shy. Nothing was ever good enough for his mother when he was growing up. And when he was in school, he partied a little too much. And after school, the one job he could get was working on a boat. And so he stayed with that and ended up working his way up the ranks in that world. And now, at this point in his life, he's married. He has two little girls he absolutely dotes on. He adores his girls. On Sunday, the whole family, they go to church. And when he comes home, he likes to listen to the opera when it comes on the radio. Not because he has any deep understanding about opera, because he doesn't. It's his mother used to listen to the opera when it comes on the radio, and he turns it on, even though it kind of makes him sad sometimes. You know, there's this thing, he almost can't stop himself from this habit of, you listen to the opera on Sunday afternoons. So one day, he found out that the cruise ship, he's now a captain of this enormous cruise liner, and that they're going to be going near his old hometown. And so he decides he wants to show off for his old high school buddies and show them this big, enormous cruise liner that he's the captain of. And so he decides to steer the boat too close to the shore, and it goes aground and it starts to sink. And he panics, absolutely panics. He's one of the first people, one of the only people in the lifeboat. Like, he literally pushes women and children aside to get on the lifeboat. And from the lifeboat, he calls it into the Italian Coast Guard from his cell phone. And once the Italian Coast Guard figures out it's the captain calling from a lifeboat before anybody has been evacuated, they order him back on the boat to oversee the evacuation, which he refuses to do. So that was the true story of the Italian sea captain back in 2012, who ran his ship aground, and 32 people ended up dying and because of his negligence, and he ended up going to prison for manslaughter for that. Now, of the biography I gave you, what of that had any influence to you for the story I was telling you about the sea captain whose ship ran aground?
Well, I guess I saw that he had insecurities, and then that really fueled him, and he was kind of trapped. You said he was shy, but there was a part of him that kind of wanted to have this like peacock plumage and show off, and that cost him because of the accident. That was basically his plumage, trying to sort of spread his feathers, and he made a bad mistake, and he kind of showed who his character was by not helping the others on the, as the captain, he should eat last, he should be off the boat last, things like that. And he didn't, he showed that he put himself first.
And what about any of the other stuff I told you about his childhood or his family? Did that have any bearing for you?
Yeah, it did. It showed me that he was a caring man, sensitive, cared for his family. You said you had 2 daughters that he doted on. But I think he was still stuck, as all of us are, in his childhood, because he would listen to this opera, even though it didn't really make him happy. I think he was trying to get maybe a validation he never got. Mm-hmm. And that drove him, mm-hmm. as it does most of us. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it drove him to a point that was very costly and cost innocent people their lives.
Well, for me, pretty much none of that profile had any bearing on the story. To me, the story is about a man who's so cowardly, right, who makes such a brash move. And by the way, the only part I didn't make up about him was that he did make the choice to steer the boat close to shore to show off for friends. That part is a true part of the story. But beyond that, the rest of his backstory, we could pick elements that might highlight things or bring things out more, but they really didn't have any bearing on the story or even who he was. Like the fact that, this is basically, it's a man who is shallow enough that he thinks that it's worthwhile to show off for some high school buddies, even though that's putting people's lives at risk, and that he's a coward. That he's an absolute coward, right? When the crisis came, he was the most cowardly person on the scene, so much so he wouldn't get back on the ship to oversee things. that just outweighs the whole biography that I dreamt up about him. You know, we can pick some things that can, help emphasize that. But the real story is about a coward, not about someone who had a childhood with a difficult parent, you know? And so I really like to focus on what is happening. What are they doing in the now? And then we might pick elements that help emphasize, further enforce certain ideas about them, or sometimes specific backstory, a specific incident that makes someone behave a certain way. But in the case of the Italian sea captain, when I read that story in the paper, I didn't have any interest in who he was, what his backstory was. I was just fascinated by someone who would make such a stupid decision as to show off for a bunch of friends and then be a coward in the face of the problems he caused and caused so many people's deaths.
Right. Yeah, that's a very tragic story. One last thing, if I may. So, in another reason, maybe that writing a long bio, you talked about maybe people in other classes finding out what's the character's favorite color, what car do they drive. Is it because the writer's becoming too attached to that character and now they can't allow bad things to happen and not be biased toward them?
It's not so much that they can't allow bad things to happen, but they become so attached to these preconceived and arbitrary ideas about who they are that they even before they figured out the story, they're saying, yeah, but this character wouldn't do that. And I question, well, why wouldn't they do that? If that's going to be the most interesting. Let's say I started with just the bio of the Italian sea captain, and then had him, do the ship go aground and become a coward. Maybe I would have been let's say it's not a real life story, that it was, that I'm not basing it on anything, but I start with this profile, and then I say, but would he really do that? I mean, he is caring for his daughters, and that makes him not a coward. Like it could get people thinking the wrong way, versus let's get to the story. The story is a coward, someone who behaves in a cowardly way and is going to have to live with the repercussions of that. How do they live with that? So I'm just concerned with the 120 questions. They're going to get so distracted by this invention they have made that they won't find their way into the story. They'll be inflexible.
And two, people are situational. They can be wonderful with one group of people, but then they can be absolutely cutthroat and despicable with others. And they sort of have these situational ethics. So it's, if we get too locked into, well, this is a good person, they would never do that. Mm-hmm. We've seen 100,000 stories of what people might be pillars in their society or in their little area, but then they do despicable things behind the scenes.
Yeah, it can be, and I think it can be an even better tool using a little character profile stuff for adding irony. Like if the person had been, the Italian sea captain had been one way, and now is, had just lectured his little girls about the importance of standing up for yourself and bravery, and then they behave like a coward, right? Those can be interesting little choices to add things like that. But ultimately, who this man is, his character is somebody who's a coward, right? And it took this incident to bring it out. And that's the important part of the story to me.
Most screenwriting books and gurus say that there should be a significant turning point at, let's say, the 25-minute mark or the 25-page mark. Do you agree, or do you find this rule too arbitrary or too rigid?
Again, writers can do whatever they want, but they would be wise to pay attention to that one rule. I don't like to have a lot of arbitrary rules, certain page numbers. That's one I do adhere to. And the reason is this. I think a lot of people maybe don't understand why that is. They just hear it as a rule. We have about a 25-minute attention span, right? The Pomodoro method. Are you familiar with that?
I have heard of that, yeah.
Right. So it's a method. It's basically a work process method when you're feeling like you're procrastinating. And I recommend it to my writers all the time. If you're not, I find things like beat sheets particularly unpleasant to write. Scripts are more fun. The beat sheet's not so fun. You have to kind of force yourself. Sometimes you have to use something like the Pomodoro method, which says basically we have about a attention span of 25 minutes. And so you set your timer, and those 25 minutes you work. No goofing off, no looking at the internet, no getting a sip of water. Work for 25 minutes. Even if you're just staring at the screen for 25 minutes, do that until the buzzer rings. And then you take a 5-minute break. And then you come back, you do another 25 minutes. It's a really effective way to get you to focus on something when you don't feel like it. It's like, how bad is it for me to have to focus for 25 minutes? It's not so bad. I can do it. And before you know, the time has flown by once you get into it. So we have about a 25-minute attention span before something needs to happen, So the first act is setup. We're hearing, the stuff leading to the big thing that's going to happen. And we really kind of need that. If you wait too long, I'm probably better with being okay with people doing it a little bit earlier. That's okay. But I wouldn't go later. If your point of no return isn't till, which is what I call the event at 25 pages, if that doesn't happen until page 35, there's a really big chance at 25 pages I got bored. And I didn't keep reading your script until the big thing that needs to happen to make this story happens. So it can sound a little arbitrary, and I know people feel like that, but it's a rhythm that we are used to. We've been watching movies forever. And if something doesn't happen at about 25 minutes, we start to feel like this is meandering and not going anywhere. It's feeling like a situation, not a story, right? That there isn't a connection between the events at that point. So it is one rule that I think you'd be smart to follow. I actually have my writers, so when I have my classes, I assign a movie every week. And I have my students analyze it using my nutshell technique method. And I've told them very often, like when they're looking at things trying to figure out a point of no return in an existing movie, they'll tell me something that happens at 5 minutes. And I've told them the point of no return would never happen at 5 minutes. Did you check your watch? And they're like, no, I didn't. I'm like, check your time, check the time. And I had some students who were concerned. There's a movie theater chain that has a very, very strict no texting rule. No lights from phone. Your phone should be away and dark, and you shouldn't be texting, or they will throw you out without.
Ooh, I like that place.
They'll throw you out without giving you a refund, and they're very, very strict about it. And I had some students who were concerned that they were going to get thrown out because I told them you've got to check I don't want you bringing in something, telling me something that 15 minutes is the point of no return. I want you to check what happens at 25 minutes. And I will say, if I have doubters out there, they should go and watch their favorite movies, check their watch, and tell me what happens at 25 minutes. Before you doubt, pay attention. You'll see most movies. At that point, we've had a big event that's going to push us into Act 2 and the main part of the story.
Why does the point of no return have to be an external force?
Yeah, that is a great point, right? Sometimes people think that the point of no return can be a decision. And I'm always reminding people the point of no return, which is what I call the event at 25 minutes, is never, ever somebody decides to do something. It is always something happens to them that they didn't expect, and then they might decide to do something. So if they're identifying somebody doing something, I ask them, well, what was the thing that got them to do that? So it's an external event. It's the one thing actually in my structure that is not internal. It is what we have is we have an element of fate happening. Had this thing not happened, this movie wouldn't have happened. That's another important definition of the point of no return. It is the event that makes this movie. And had it not happened, the movie would have gone some other direction, and who knows what it would have been. And so it's an external force. It also answers, have you ever heard the note people get of why now? Right? Writers sometimes get the note, I don't understand why. Why is this happening now? This answers that question. It's happening now because this happened, this thing happened. And so then they made a decision. They didn't just wake up one day and make a decision, right? That's when we say, why now? Why are they why are they deciding to do this now? They decided to do this now because this external event came out of nowhere and suddenly made it possible for them to make this decision or put everything in place so they could make the decision. But without it, it feels arbitrary. It feels like people are just kind of making unmotivated decisions, as opposed to something has happened that has pushed their life into a direction that they did not anticipate, is the idea behind it.
If we think about an external force that pushes a character sort of out of their comfort zone, we could use the story of Erin Brockovich. And, you know, she's a single mom, she's dealing with a lot of different things, and she becomes angered by information that she finds out, and it puts her on this new path.
Yeah, you know, she was assigned the grunt job of going through the files, and she's doing her job, trying to take it seriously, and she starts noticing all these medical files in there that she wasn't anticipating, and everyone tells her, pushes, you know, they don't want to answer her questions. Well, she's questioning that, and they're like, just do your job, basically. And this starts to reveal to her this pattern that is happening out there. And had that not happened, had she not been assigned that, let's say she was assigned to the mail room or assigned, you know, to the marketing department or something, the story known as Erin Brockovich wouldn't have happened. She had to have this external event of being assigned this task to stumble upon the thing she stumbles upon that she then makes choices about, right? But for her, think about how it would very much not work if she just spontaneously, I mean, it would just be a completely different movie if, you know, someone who just decided one day, I'm going to hunt down and, you know, try to track down these, take on an oil company out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere.
Right, right. So she saw people, and these were people, I think, in a town a little bit further from her, but she also kind of probably identify with sort of their working class plight and felt like no one's helping them and they're kind of being brushed off.
Yeah, there are people kind of like her who no one's listening to, right? No one's, you know, paying attention to. And there's a clear pattern and no one's following up with it.
How does the point of no return factor into the nutshell technique?
So the point of no return is what I call the event that happens at the 25-minute mark or 25% into the running time. And the idea is the event that makes this movie this movie. You know, very often we see it reflected in the title of in some way. That's how important it is. And it is one of 8 elements of the nutshell technique. It's the only element on my nutshell technique that is external. Everything else is internal. What does the character want? What is the character's flaw? What is the character's choice? This is the one thing that's external. The thing that happened to them unexpectedly that pushed them onto the story path, and had it not happened to them, the story wouldn't have happened. And it's super important. It's not, you know, some other methods, I'm sort of surprised of the name that we all use different names, it seems, and where it suggests, you know, it's just like a break into two. It's a lot more than that. This is the most important event of the whole movie, and the movie is really a series of events, things happening, right? This is the one that's more important than anything. And it's not arbitrary. It is specifically designed to test the protagonist. So with the point of no return, the protagonist is getting something they want. At the exact same time, they're getting something they don't want in the point of no return, and that is what I call the catch. So a big problem. And so the point of no return contains this catch. It's this big problem and we need a big problem going into Act 2. You can't just give the protagonist what they want. That kind of ends the story. You give them what they want, but you give it to them with a big problem. And so that, unbeknownst to them, is going to be testing them. And that catch that's part of the point of no return is ideally the perfect test of their flaw, which is another nutshell element. So it's a very loaded moment. It's the only external moment, though, or external of my elements in the 8 elements of the nutshell technique.
But forgive me, correct me if I'm wrong though, but in Sideways, Miles, it's all internal. He's kind of his own worst enemy.
We're always our own worst enemy, but it's always an external event that puts things into motion, right? So in Sideways, the external event is when they meet Maya, the love interest, and so that's one thing, meeting her, and his friend lies and says his book's about being published. Right?
Okay.
That was not his decision. Somebody else did that. That actually puts the story into motion. That actually gets Maya to agree to a date. And then because Miles is too embarrassed to contradict that or say anything about that, he's now got to live that lie, right? So it's the perfect test of him, right? But had he not lied, the story wouldn't have continued. It would, could have been about these 2 guys in wine country. But as far as pursuing the love interest and his lies about who he is, as he's trying to, woo this woman and instead be honest about who he is, and also his relationship with his friend as well is affected. But that's what the whole middle part, the second act, is about, right? It's because he said that. Had he not said that, the story wouldn't have been put into motion.
So that's the external push.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. How important is the climax, and at what point in their process should writers figure out what their story's climax is going to be?
The climax is kind of everything. It's so important. In some ways, it's what the story is. Stories can start in lots of different places, but they really can only end in one place. And they tell us what the whole story was about. So if you don't know your climax, you don't really know your story. You just have a premise. The climax is the answer to what this was all about, or it's the beginning of that. And so people come to me, I have private clients as well as I do this in my classes. They filled out their nutshell technique form. They're all excited about it. We're going through it. And I'll tell them, I'm not going to be attached to anything you say, really, until I hear your climax. You can tell me what the character wants. You can tell me the character's flaw. That's all good. But I'm flexible in my brain until I hear a climax. Because if you don't have a climax yet, or if you don't have a good one, we're going to stop. I'm going to stop right then and there. I'm going to talk with you because you don't know your story yet. We got to figure that out. And so, the definition of a great ending is that it's inevitable yet unexpected. This is attributed to Aristotle, but it's not certain that he said that, but whatever. It is, a great ending is inevitable yet unexpected. That's a pretty tall order, by the way, but that is our goal as writers, is to find an ending, and when we say ending, we really mean climax, find an ending that is inevitable yet unexpected. So when you see a movie that has a great climax, ideally, you never saw it coming, right? That's the unexpected. Once you see that moment, you can't imagine the movie any other way. That's the inevitable. So it's a very tall order. It is not an easy thing to do, but it's so important. And again, I strongly believe you don't know your story if you don't know your ending. So here's my best advice about how people can find their inevitable yet unexpected climax. Right before the climax, you want to have your protagonist should be at their crisis, their lowest moment. And they should be between a rock and a hard place. This is really important. It needs to be a rock and a hard place. Can't be a rock and a soft place. If it's a rock and a soft place, well, we know they're going to pick soft place. Or if they don't pick soft place, it's not going to make any sense to us. Why wouldn't you pick soft place if that's an option? It has to be a rock and a hard place. 2 bad choices that they can't see a way out. We can't see a way out. Now, as we begin the third act, the climax is the first thing in the third act. What are they going to choose? Are they going to choose rock? Are they going to choose hard place? No, they're going to choose, and I'm going to give you a really important technical term we use in my classes. They're going to choose banana. Banana. It's not a rock. It's not a hard place. It's not even a mineral. It's a third choice you never saw coming, right? So that's what it needs to be, a third choice we never saw coming. Now, it's a third choice that we never saw coming, but it can't come out of nowhere. If it comes out of nowhere, then we'd call that, Deus ex machina, like, God machine is the term from the Greek, where, basically, something magically saves the day or comes along. It needs to be a moment. It tends to be a light bulb moment. The character, that's why it's unexpected. They didn't think of it before. They need to think of it. Only when we get them rock bottom and you've taken away all the good options, can they come up with this moment. So it's a light bulb moment. And it's typically, it's going to involve sacrifice. They can get, they get not what they want, but what they needed in this moment. So they're going to give up the thing they really thought they wanted or something like that, in order to achieve the greater good. So they may sacrifice their freedom, but they're going to get the deeper thing that they needed, the more profound thing that they needed. And so this is a big step away from their flaw and towards the strength that they're going to have in the end. And really it's everything. It's, that's the moment everyone paid their money for. That's the moment, that's why people are in the theater, to see this moment. And it's not just because that moment should be exciting and fun. It's because emotionally, it's incredibly exciting for us because we didn't see it coming and we can see the change that is happening. And so it's important and it's so critical to telling the story. So again, if you don't know your climax, you don't know your story. One caveat I want to mention is something called schmuck bait, which I love the term, I think, because I love saying the word schmuck. But schmuck bait, where the choice is, you're telling us that someone is, that the princess is going to die, and only a schmuck would believe that the princess is going to die. That's one usage. And then another version of schmuck bait is when it's just a really unbelievable choice that they make. That, again, only schmuck would believe that they're actually going to do that. So watch out for that it's not schmuck bait. You really want to, and it's hard. It is really hard to find that banana. But that is so important, to find that third choice we didn't see coming, but make it one that we're going to believe, that doesn't feel like schmuck bait, a deus ex machina. Let me give you one example that I see so often. I cannot tell you how many people have come to me with a story that is falls under this somewhat broad description I'm going to give you, where a person has to choose between an object, some sort of material object, something involving money, or a loved one, a family member or a love interest. Gee, what do you think they're going to choose? They're going to choose the family member, right? I saw it from the beginning. I saw it coming the moment you told me the setup in the beginning. So that is your task as a writer, is that you have to find out a way where I don't see that choice, right? It has to be a third choice I don't see. So either you're going to change the choices to something else or destroy one of the choices, but you don't want to put yourself in a corner where you told me it's, these two choices and they're just going to choose one of those two choices, and I'm going to know it. I'm going to see it coming from there. So just to be aware of that, of setting up, finding a way to set it up so that it's a third choice we didn't see coming. Maybe there's a different option, or maybe you frame it so those weren't the two choices in the beginning. Because ultimately that's everything.
Sure. So the banana is not going to be, let's say a spaceship comes down and saves someone, if that's not part of the world that's been created. It's going to be, hey, they saw someone changed a trust without the other family members, knowing, or, just like some little twist that is plausible, but we didn't really see coming type of a thing.
Yeah. So the spaceship, that's a Deus Ex Machina kind of scenario where the God machine, something is saving the day. And it also shouldn't be an easy choice. It can't just be like they found out a piece of information about the trust. It has to put them in a bind, right? If you don't want it to be easy where they can just say, well, this is illegal and call the police and save the day, right? That's not a surprise. You want to make it so they can't call the police, that it's going to be hard, right? That they're going to have to figure out some other solution. They're going to have to make a compromise, or they're going to have to try to trick the bad guy, but in a way that is a true risk, not just something they could have done all along to save the day. It's something in this moment that they're going to take a chance on, that could fail, that has consequences, and that also they're going to lose something. They can't just do a banana is not save the day. It is try something incredibly risky that I'm going to lose things, and I'll lose maybe the respect of my family or the public because I'm going to confess to the world I was part of the scheme, but it does the greater good of bringing the bad guys down, but I'm also bringing myself down.
How is the want the opposite of the crisis?
Yeah, so the idea is the crisis is what happens at the 75% mark. And what we want to see is that the protagonist they will have gotten their want earlier, in what happens at the 25% mark, but they're going to grow to hate the thing that they want. And so by the point of the crisis, they want the opposite of what they wanted in the beginning. And so what we're doing is we're setting up a really profound reversal, is that the character's going a full 180 degrees. The thing that they most coveted in the beginning, they now despise. And that also contributes to their crisis, the fact that that's a low point. They don't know what to want in life. They're lost. This thing, that very often the want is something they've built their whole identity around. And now, they've decided they despise that thing. And that puts them at the rock bottom. And that's followed immediately by the climatic choice. The climatic choice is back to back with the crisis. That choice comes out of the rock and the hard place that is at the crisis, right? So the crisis is their lowest place. They now hate the thing that they want, and they are stuck between two bad choices. And so what are they going to do? They're going to make a choice in the climax that is neither rock nor hard place, right? It's going to be banana, because they're now going in a new direction. They've never even considered this direction before. They were single-minded before about the want. I want this. My whole life is about this. And they've now are empty at the moment of the crisis when they realize that it isn't the most important thing. And they don't know what they want next. And they have to make a choice related to that.
Are there some simple tips you can give us for writing dialogue?
Yes, the most important key to writing dialogue is that dialogue is about intention. It's about characters in stories want things all the time from the other characters that they're not getting. All of the characters. That's what produces conflict, right? Everyone knows conflict is kind of a necessity of drama. The reason there's conflict is because we don't have the things that we want. And so the best and easiest way to write dialogue is to focus in on what your character wants from the other character. And all of the characters have these intentions. It's not just your protagonist. I tend to know my protagonist's intentions pretty naturally because I have a strong sense of the character and I don't really have to think about it too consciously when I write a scene. Immediately she'll have a strong intention. I don't have to be conscious. I will have to often be conscious about the other characters because they're not there just to serve your protagonist or your needs for the protagonist, right? They also have to have things they want that they don't have. And that's the key. That is the simplest, strongest way to write dialogue, is to be aware of that, is that characters don't have things that they want. And sometimes they talk about it directly, sometimes they don't talk about it directly, right? But the words that are coming out of their mouth are not necessarily related to their want. I mean, they may not say it directly, but the underlying message is, that's subtext basically, right? Subtext is what the characters mean by the dialogue as opposed to what they say. So there's this great scene I love to use in my classes in August Osage County, in the climax of August Osage County. I'm not going to be able to quote it because it is all filled with swearing. And that's one of the reasons I picked the scene. It's kind of fun when I do it in my classes. And but the Julia Roberts character is, she's demanding that her mother eat the fish that was brought for her at lunch. And we go through the scene and I ask my students what were each of the characters' intentions. And sometimes, most of the time they don't, but sometimes people will say Julia Roberts' intention is for her mother to eat the fish. And I'm like, that is absolutely not her intention. She doesn't care whether her mother eats the fish. Those are the words she is saying. But that's not the intention. The intention has nothing to do with that, right? Her intention is to distract everyone in order to stop her sister's about to reveal this big secret. And she's trying to stop it. So she's just kind of swearing at people and yelling at people in order to keep people from doing this. So her intention is to get everyone, is to prevent this truth from coming out. But her words are eat the fish, but with a bunch of F-bombs in it, So it's just a great example that, what we say is not the same thing as the meaning. And I find, by the way, that actors are naturals or tend to be naturals at writing dialogue because that's the first thing they learn in acting class is basically, right, is that we're not acting the lines, you're playing an intention. They will study the lines written by writers, and they're going to be trying to figure out what is my intention, right? It's like that old cliched scene you've seen where the Hollywood actress says to the director, what's my motivation? That's what we mean by intention. What is it I want? What do I want from the character? That's what the actor's playing. They're not playing sadness, right? That leads to bad acting. They play, I'm angry and I want this person to listen to me, right? That's the intention behind whatever the dialogue is. And so actors tend to be they tend to be more naturals at dialogue for that reason. And in fact, I've told people, if beyond what I teach them, if they're still having a hard time with dialogue, that take an acting class. And I've had some people do that and end up going into acting because it's just a great way to get you thinking about intentions. And there are other factors, we want to keep in mind. You want to write the way dialogue that sounds like how we talk, which is different than how we write. So there are other things to keep in mind that, keep that, for example, we're not always grammatically correct. Even people who are very, well educated are not 100% grammatically correct all the time. That people generally are going to use contractions. Even people who think they're very proper and think they never use contractions some of the time. That they're going to have distinct vocabulary kind of word choices that they like. Little things like that. But honestly, those are all secondary. I've read scripts all the time where all the characters sound alike. That can be a problem, but sometimes if they're all coming from the same kind of social class, it's not terribly surprising. But what you can't get away with is writing dialogue without intentions. And the thing is, it makes it so easy to write. That's the good news. You just ask yourself, what are my character's intention? This character, and I like I said, I like to phrase it in terms of what does the one character want from the other character? And it should be specific. Like, I'm not a fan of loosey-goosey, they want respect. No, I want this person to listen to me right now, right? So real specific, intentions. And the beauty of that is the scenes write themselves. If I just establish, okay, this is this character's intention, that character's intention, I'm just transcribing. I just hear the characters argue with each other. It makes it really easy to write once you know that. It's particularly a requirement if you have a lot of exposition. Because if you don't have intentions, we know that it's just about exposition. Like, there should never be a scene there just because you want us to know something. Now, that said, you're probably going to have some scenes every now and then that are there just because you want us to know something. But you got to hide that. You got to hide that by the fact that people have really strong intentions. And so I'm not noticing, it doesn't reek of exposition to me because the characters have very forceful things that they want from each other. And so the exposition comes out like as a little byproduct of what they're saying. And so it feels natural. If you don't have intentions and people are talking in exposition, then immediately it'll reek of that. And it'll, particularly a writer will notice, even non-writers will notice, is like, this is really boring. Why are these people just, telling me a bunch of stuff? But if you have intentions, we're not going to notice that, or we're not going to notice as much.
So if it's a restaurant scene, let's say, and someone's saying that their intention is they're worried about a family member, they say, I'm worried about your sister. But instead of saying that on-the-nose dialogue, maybe, yeah, I think I'm going to have this salad. How's Jen?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, right? Eat
Right.
the fish.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So the words that are coming out of the mouth are not the same thing as the intention. And sometimes characters are on the nose more, and sometimes they talk all in subtext. More often it's a bit of a mix, or you're going to have different moments of that. But yeah, what's important is the intention, not the words.
Sure. And going back to sort of the formality of the writing, even like you said, the most educated of someone might say cuz, wanna, gotta,
Exactly.
y'all. There's just different things. Forget about it. Just different dialects and regions, and so.
Yeah, there are things that I would never put in a formal email. That I'll say, how you doing? I'm doing good, right? That's not grammatically correct, but that's the thing I'll say. I probably wouldn't put that in an email, so just to be mindful of that. And one last thing I'll say about dialogue too is it's the illusion of how people really talk. It should be a very succinct version of it. You lose readers very quickly with overwritten dialogue. Dialogue should go at a pretty fast pace. There are going to be exceptions. You might have people make a speech every now and then, but most of the time, it's a couple of lines max, back and forth. You want to trim everything you can. Even if you have a character that the idea is they ramble on and on, I don't want to write that for too long because it gets tired. It's more, you would indicate that more by the character starts talking and somebody goes, oh, here he goes again, right? We don't actually want to hear the character go on and on and
Right.
on. So keep that in mind. It's a really succinct version of that. A real sign of bad dialogue is where I almost feel like the writer was trying to pad their pages or something because the characters are having the same argument, maybe slightly different words, but they're making the same points over and over again. You don't do that. Make your point once and move on, right?
So if I'm waiting for the bus, I get on the bus, I show the bus driver my flash pass or whatever, and then I say, do you stop at First Street? Instead of him saying, yes, ma'am, we stop at First, he would be, yep, and keep moving. And very little interaction.
As succinct as you can. Yeah. There's a great example that was from Hitchcock's movie Marnie. There's a woman who is in a forced marriage, and it was originally written as this long scene, and where we see the wedding and then the reception and all these different things, and then finally at the reception, it ends on a shot of the the flowers on the table that say congratulations. And Hitchcock said, yeah, let's just cut to the flowers. We didn't need any of all that other stuff.
Are there some simple tips you can give us on writing better scene description and action?
Yes, a couple things. So first of all, make sure you write things in the order we see them. There's a tendency some writers have to still write a little prosy. Prosy you can get away, prose is not all written in literal order. In screenwriting, everything is happening now. And now, and now. There's no this and then that as this happens. So I actually don't love the word as sometimes. It tends to be, it's a prosy kind of word. Believe me, you can use the word as. There are a lot of great screenplays that have the word as in it. But I think it's something just to flag for people to be aware of. Very often I see it and the sentence could have been broken into two sentences and it would have worked better. So as I don't love because it is throwing off the forward linear time. I also don't like it because we use it for a dependent clause. And so that means your sentence is going to be unnecessarily long. And so instead of telling me that as she clears the dishes, he runs out to the car, break it into two sentences, make it two different moments, she washes the dishes, he runs out to the car, something like that. Shorter sentences, by the way, are often easier. As a reader, you don't want us to have to read something twice. And so this is a way where I can get it a lot more clearly. And if you have a longer sentence with a dependent clause, things like as, I have to parse it sometimes. And so it's just easier. Sometimes it does feel a little regressive, like we're writing like we're in third grade again. But I almost will prefer writers do that for a little while until they get, if they're not, particularly some people who are coming from prose, to get them in the habit of thinking this, then this, then this, then this. And even though there are sometimes things happening simultaneously, we can only kind of process it at once. And so that's why you write this and then you tell us this happens, then this happens, then this happens. So that's one thing. Another thing I find is that I have a challenge I have for my writers. I call it my don't walk challenge. Don't use the verb walks. Just don't use it. Instead of he walks into the room, he dances into the room. He skips into the room. He runs into the room. He makes like a bat out of hell out of the room, right? All of these things are, first of all, walks it's a boring word. It's a blocking word, right? So blocking is where, if you believe Wikipedia, the term blocking was from Gilbert of Gilbert and Sullivan, where he took physical blocks and used them to show to the singers where they were going to move in relationship to their lines. So on your first line, I want you to walk from upstage to downstage, and when he does that, I want you to walk from here to there, right? That's blocking. That's boring. And that's not really our job, by the way. We don't have to block the scenes. So instead, use a term, words other than walks that are more evocative. You're also avoiding adverbs. So instead of walks quickly, he run walks. That was kind of my cheat at one word. Or he speed walks into the room, right? Adverbs and adjectives water things down. Instead, we want more specific verbs. And so that's why walks is kind of a blah verb. It's really just blocking. Versus if you tell me that someone creeps into the room, that tells me a lot, right? That tells me about the character. It tells me about the intention behind the words. It's more than just telling me that blocking-wise they came into the room. And then similar words that I don't like are looks and sees. Again, you can find much more interesting verbs. You know, what if someone glances at something versus they glare? Those are very two different ways to see or to look at something, right? So those, I think it's good, and I actually encourage writers to create their own personal thesaurus, to look for words like that, to find more specific verbs. So you don't need an adverb, you know, if you have a more specific verb, and start collecting ones that you notice kind of irk me, you know, instead of gets, grabs, you know, or instead of sits, perches. You know, those are more interesting, more evocative. Readers are human. We want to be, what I like to say, we want to be delighted. Like great screenwriting, it's delightful. You know, it may not, I could have written, yeah, he walked in the room, he did this, he did that, and plot-wise it might have worked just as well. But it's not going to be as evocative to me. It's not going to lure me in as much as delightful writing. And so I think more specific verbs do that. And similarly, more specific nouns. So again, adjectives, like adverbs, water things down a little bit. So instead of telling me it's a big, expensive boat, call it a yacht. Right? I get a more specific picture in my head when I hear the word yacht than big expensive boat, and I saved a couple of words, right? So more specific nouns and verbs I think are a really good thing to do as well.
Okay, so instead of, you said C's is no good, right?
Yes, C's is on my avoid list.
I like this game. So it's sitting at table 5, having ordered his salad. He spies the waiter lean into the maitre d' and knew he was in trouble.
Yeah, right. There's so many great. So many great, you know, verbs that you can use.
That. This is fun.
Yeah, right. So it's just much more evocative. It's much more delightful writing. You can use walks, and you know, and I actually in a first draft, I tell people don't even worry about that. But then I do, I like to do a search and replace at the end just to make sure I take out all the walks, sees, and looks, and put more interesting, and don't go overboard. You know, I've had people, you know, they've got drug dealers sauntering, and I'm like, I don't know that that's the right verb, you know, but just, you know, try to avoid the really obvious ones, right? Like walks, which again is really more of a blocking word than a really good dramatic writing word.
How many words are in this writer's thesaurus that you've asked your students to create, or they can for fun?
Yeah, I mean, I say they should create their own, right? I get them started. I have one where I have, I don't know, and I've seen much longer lists, but where I have like 20 for walks, and I have, you know, 15 for looks and sees, and I tell them to keep adding to it, and there are a long list literally of those words and different synonyms that you can use for them, but that's how long the list is that I get them started with.
How should writers describe characters?
Character intros are a great opportunity to, you know, what I like to do think of them as they're a little bit of a psst to the reader, a little bit of a psst. You see this guy? He's not exactly what he appears to be. And so the best character intros they're taking something physical we can see, but they're not on all points, you know, bulletin. We don't care what a character's hair and eye color or, you know, things like that are, unless it's some sort of plot point. You can tell us what they do, but it's more interesting if you can give me something where I can see on you, but you're going to give me an interpretation of it. So it's a great opportunity, first of all, to exercise your voice as a writer, because we get to break the most formal sense of what is seen and heard. You're actually telling us a little bit of your opinion. You're breaking the fourth wall and giving us a little heads up on the character. But it should be something we can see in them in some way, ideally, in my opinion. So Shawshank Redemption happens to have the greatest character intros ever written. And in fact, one of my favorite ones, I think of all times, is the description of the warden, the evil antagonist of the story. And I'm actually going to read it to you. It's so delicious. Warden Samuel Norton strolls forth, a colorless man in a gray suit and a church pin in his lapel. He looks like he could piss ice water. He appraises the newcomers with flinty eyes. So that's so perfect. I mean, I love the detail of the church pin in his lapel. And I went back and watched the movie to see, he has some sort of pin in his lapel, right? But it's taking something physical on him, right? So we don't get a whole lot, we don't get a description that he's got gray hair and doesn't go into much detail about him, right? But he's wearing a suit with a church pin in his lapel. And then the author is giving us the psst, don't be fooled by that church pin. This man is the opposite of our idea of Christian charity. This man is so cold, he could piss ice water, right? And you could, again, it's something the actor can actually play. It's not, it's actually not violating what is seen and heard. I can actually see that. Right. In a good character intro, I say, I might not have guessed that exact same phrase, but if I had the script in my hand and I was watching the movie, and I could go, oh yeah, he totally is thinking that. He totally looks like he could piss ice water, right? Then it works. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity to show your voice, find a clever way, that's delightful. We find it delightful when you find a clever thing. We kind of chuckle to ourselves. And it hooks me in. It gives me just a little heads up about who they are. So writers should absolutely take advantage of the fact that we get to do character introductions.
Right, and there's a bite to the words as well. They're not boring. There's things that kind of pop out at you.
Yeah, yeah. Didn't use the word walks, right? He strolls forth.
Sure.
He didn't look at the men. He eyes them.
Is it possible to have a tragedy or a sad ending that is also satisfying to the audience?
It is. It's tricky though. And what a lot of people get wrong is that a tragedy is not like the colloquial usage of the word tragic. We're not just pummeling someone down and down and down. For a tragedy to be satisfying, they're actually going up, up, up before they come down. And so that's what a lot of people miss. It's not satisfying to see someone just pummeled to death. It is satisfying to see someone whose flaw is greed get richer and richer and richer as they go up and then get pulled down by that own flaw. And also related to that is that their downfall should be primarily about their flaw. It should not be about external things. I mean, their external things will contribute to it, but we don't want characters that are merely victims, that are just victims of bad things happening to them. A protagonist is a character that isn't just a victim. They may also be a victim in some senses of the word, but there's a reason why we're putting them on this journey. And there's something in them that needed to be tested. And there's some ways they asked for this journey. They're not just a victim of it. So I think people sometimes when writing tragedies, they just think, oh, this is a sad ending story, and so I'm going to make it a tragedy. You have to have an up, up, up. And we also have to see that with the choice they make at the climax, that it's a bad choice. We have to, what you want to experience and what makes a tragedy satisfying and kind of delightful in my mind is when I'm rooting with the character despite myself, even though I know they're a tragic figure. I know there's something wrong with them. I can't help myself, that it's a little delicious watching them do their thing and use their flaws to better themselves in the short run. And so I'm kind of still identifying somewhat. And then when they reach the pinnacle and now they're going to make the climatic choice that's going to take them in the other direction and give them a sad ending, it needs to be a choice where we go, oh, no, 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 why did you do that? You could have had it all. You had it all. You could have walked away with this. Everything was fine, and then you went too far. We have to have that for it to feel satisfying. Otherwise, it just feels like we're just pummeling people. So it's different than the colloquial usage of the word a tragic figure in life. A tragic hero in a story needs to have an up. They need to hit a triumph, and then they need to make make a bad choice, and that brings them the sad ending, not solely because the world was cruel to them.
How does the nutshell technique ensure writers a satisfying ending?
So it does it in a couple different ways. Have you ever heard the expression, the problem in your third act is in your first act? Right? So that's getting back to what I'm talking about, that we have to set up things. We have to set up the journey in the first act in order to have a satisfying third act. So that's part of it. If you didn't, if you didn't set it up in an interesting way, you're not going to resolve it in an interesting way. And then the ending, I mean, I would, refer to the third act. So we have the climax and the climatic choice, and we want it to be, as I've said before, they're choosing between rock, hard place. They choose banana, a third choice we didn't see coming. So it's unexpected yet inevitable. Now, we're not at a happy ending yet. That's just the climax. You have to finish the rest of the ending there. And so from there, I see a couple different patterns. Sometimes I see the climatic choice. It's as if the climatic choice is a kind of an umbrella for a new behavior, and the protagonist then repeats it in a couple of ways. So, for example, in Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart's climatic choice is to stick his neck out to ensure that the Laszlos get on the on the plane safely. And he does it 4 different ways. So instead of one explosive climax, he does 4 death-defying things to get them on there. That's one pattern I see. And then that gets us to the final step, which I'll come back to. The other pattern I see is where we have an explosive climax, and then we have kind of falling action, that the climax and the climatic choice, they don't yet earn the happy ending, if it's going to have a happy ending. They have made a step towards change, but it's an imperfect step. They haven't fully dealt with the things that they need to deal with. And so in this pattern, I see now the protagonist has to deal with the consequences of this climatic choice, the fallout and whatever has happened from that. So we're going to see that. And then we have the final step, which is the last scene of the movie that the protagonist is in, and it's where they're going to make a second step. The climatic choice was one step. The final step is a second step they make towards change, to finally becoming 180 degrees of change from where they were in the beginning emotionally, as far as the flaw. And so they're going to make a second step. It tends to be a quieter step. The climax is a big explosive moment. The final step is a much quieter moment, and maybe they don't even realize they're being watched, obviously. And so we are seeing them in their life, and often time has passed. I tell my writers to imagine 6 months later. Often you literally see that on the screen. It doesn't have to be 6 months later, but I think it's helpful to imagine, like, okay, you had this big climax and the events after that, but maybe they regressed into being the flawed person they were before, or maybe, who knows? It doesn't, they have to live with the consequences of what happened with this climax. So now we see them after time has passed. And so now it tends to be a smaller step. It's a quieter step that's showing us, oh, they really have changed. It wasn't just that one change that they made there, that they made they truly are a different person. And so it's less showy of a moment, and it tends to be a more personal moment where they are exemplifying that they have fully learned the lesson. And so usually time has passed, although interesting, Casablanca is one example where time has not passed. It's all real time in the third act. So there's no time break between his climatic choice and the final step of leaving with Renaud and saying, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, right? So we know now that he is a changed man, is going to be that he can live his life again and be happy, and is going to fall in love again. The man before was too bitter and over his experience and heartbroken. And now this time he pushed her to get on the plane, and he feels good about it. He feels good about it and realizes, oh, I can love again. I can't save the world again. I can only do that once. So he's finally free of that.
Are writing groups a good idea?
Writing groups are a great idea if you find the right people. That's sort of the trick there. You need community as a writer. You know, we tend to be introverts. We want to be left alone and do our thing, but it's lonely and you get stuck in your own head. You need people you trust. And that's the important thing. You know, you don't want a toxic writing group. You don't want a group that's competitive in a bad way. I mean, all groups are going to have a little bit of competitiveness. You know, in my screenwriting school, I strongly encourage people to start forming friendships in writing groups in the program. I would love for them to come back and take my classes again, but even if they don't, I want them to keep writing. And I find the best way you're going to do that is if you have a writing group. And even better if you find writers from something like a class or where you speak the same language and you've seen, you know, one real important thing is the ability to critique. A lot of people don't know how to critique well. And so, you know, I think a good writing group can be geared towards that so that you're critiquing in a way that isn't just, you know, I can't stand actually when I see someone doing critique a different way than the method that I use, which I call the two-way mirror. But the idea is the writer doesn't get to talk. The writer has to listen. They don't get to talk. Everyone else is going to talk about the positives first, and then they'll talk about the negatives. What do they like? What do they don't? What do they not like? And then the writer can ask questions, but I don't give them the ability to start getting defensive and start telling us what they meant to do. That's just not productive. And I've occasionally gone to, I won't do it anymore, but I've occasionally been dragged to like some sort of a script reading where they didn't follow this. And I find it excruciating. I find it absolutely excruciating listening to writers get defensive and talk about this, and hostility kind of rises up. There's no reason for that to happen. So if you find people you can trust, find people who know how to critique, you know, that are interested in being invested in your success, just like they're invested in their own. And I have seen some incredibly intense writing groups that have come out of my program. And those are the writers who've had the most success. You know, there was one of the writing groups that came out of my program. They called themselves the Cool Kids. And they've evolved over the years. And at one point, one of the members was at a screenwriting conference where somebody was giving a panel on their writing groups, some people from Hollywood. And so, and this was a writing group that it was quite legendary because I think 4 out of 5 members won the Nichols competition, which is the most prestigious screenwriting competition there is, which is kind of unbelievable almost, although it's true. And so she was all inspired after hearing that. She came back to her group and she's like, okay, guys, no more joking around. I've got all these new rules we're going to do. And, you know, they had all rules about how often you submitted work. And then they had one rule, this is pre-pandemic, but they had one rule where you had a very limited number of excused absences. And if you're going to be out, you had to Skype in to the meeting. And I have seen the photographic evidence of one of the members Skyping into one of their meetings from the hospital waiting room not long after his wife gave birth to his first child. That's how dedicated this group was, right? But this group, they are incredibly dedicated, and they really love each other. Like, they're really invested in each other's success. And so in a short period of time, I mean, you know, it was over a year of time after this rules went into effect, the woman who came back with the strict rules, she has signed to CAA. She has staffed on several TV shows. None of this was happening before the rules. The fella who Skyped in from the hospital waiting room, he signed to CAA. He's sold one script, has been hired for some others. This is a small group of 5 people. Another person did the Sundance episodic program. They weren't kidding. So they're incredibly invested in each other's success. And they also had another rule where you couldn't proceed to writing pages of your script until everybody else in the group had signed off on your beat sheet. And that some writers, it literally took a year before they got the blessing of the group, which sounds like you'd want to quit the group. But the group members said they all love this method. They love it because they have complete trust in each other, that they know it's truly ready. They know they've had all, the input of these other members to it. So this group has, gotten very serious and has been, and they're, still going. And this group, I talk about them in my classes all the time because there's some great stories. And another group was inspired by them. They're a group called the Antagonists. And they, also came up with some strict rules. And they did a 30-day challenge where they all were going to write a script in 30 days. And one of the writers in that group ended up, from his script he wrote in the 30-day challenge, he ended up signing with a manager for the first time. And we all were meeting up at this screenwriting conference in the fall. And so I was so excited to introduce the one, member to the other group because he was inspired by their groups, and they, were so supportive of each other's groups. And then shortly after, the fellow who signed with the manager got his script on the blacklist, which is, incredibly prestigious thing that, 60 Oscar nominees, nominated movies have come out of. And so I, strongly believe in that is, a writing group is a great way to find a peer group of people who support, and it should be a group who support you, right? Those, there are things you should look for in your group. And you have, groups will evolve and change. Some people won't work out, or some people are too flaky or something like that. You're going to have to deal with that along the way. But once you find that, that's really gold. So that whenever you have a new idea, right, and you can bounce it off of people you trust who will tell you, honestly what's good about it and what's not good about it, and that will help you and encourage you and also keep you writing. It's just a really lonely thing to be pursuing. So it's so nice when you have, people who support you and love your scripts and you love their scripts.
How does a writer that's, let's say, currently in a group know, am I being too sensitive, or is this a toxic group? Am I internalizing this feedback and it's actually that this is just part of the process and my writing needs to get better? Or, yeah, this is too competitive and there's a little bit of a backstabby kind of feel to it. I think I need to move on. Well, what's a good way to find a balance? Is it the writer being too sensitive? Is the group is toxic?
Yeah, it can be tricky because you definitely want a group that's going to be truthful. Right? I mean, that's one of the problems with having your friends read your scripts is they're going to say they like it probably, right? And often people don't know how to critique. They really don't know what to tell you. But at the same time, yeah, there are toxic groups, absolutely. So I think part of it is that you need to know, you need to get a sense that people are truly are telling you these things because they want you want your work to get better by either giving you constructive criticism, right? Or finding other ways to work with you, that they're not just dumping on your stuff. If they're just dumping on your stuff, then yeah, that's toxic, right? That's why I like to have a sort of a positive and a negative rule. I think it's a good way to force people to start with positives. We're all going to be way more receptive to negative criticism if you don't immediately tell me how terrible my stuff is, right? If you start with pointing out strengths, which I think everyone deserves to know, we often take it for granted that I don't need to say that. You do need to say that. People don't know what, people are incredibly vulnerable when they share their work. It's, can be very painful. So let them know what's good. And it also makes you a better writer to look for the good, to notice things you might not notice otherwise. The little strengths that people have here and there. That's how you all learn from each other. But if people are just giving you negative and just telling you, and also if they make it personal, if it's just about what they like, yes, we all have biases, we all have different genres that we like, but if, people who are giving good criticism should be able to work with that, or even say, this isn't really my genre, I'm not really a horror person, but I, really liked this element, but I couldn't relate to the horror stuff because it was too scary for me or whatever, so that they are being honest about it in a way that isn't just trying to tear you down.
Do you think anybody can be a working Hollywood screenwriter?
So much is out of your control. So are you saying, does anybody have the potential? Sure. Right? I don't believe that anyone should be excluded for who they are or their background or anything like that. But whether or not they're going to have success, that's out of your control. You just can't control that. There are things you can do to prime yourself so you're in a better position if and when it happens. But I know lots of writers who are really good and worked really hard and have not been able to make a living in the industry. I also know people who've been successful and then they stop getting work. So there are just zero guarantees in any of this.
What advice would you give to your younger self about being a screenwriter?
I would first of all tell them that it is not like a career you can just put a plan together and work hard and expect you're going to, succeed in. There are just too many things outside of your control. And I see a lot of people, and I did this when I was younger, beat myself up the first time I submitted to Sundance and got rejected. It killed me, right? Instead of realizing there are so many factors outside of my control. Not only is it a huge numbers game, there are all sorts of things going on that are not in your control. And so I think there's this unhealthy mindset a lot of people had, and I probably had too, of if you just try hard enough and work hard enough and you're dedicated hard enough, you're gonna make it. And that is, I think, a rather cruel thing, honestly, to tell people. Yes, you should, I'm all for pursuing your dreams. I've always, my whole life has been about pursuing things in the arts that were difficult. And I've gone for it, but I've never presumed I would be successful at it. I was always prepared for the fact that I may not be able to, that may not happen. So you can, there's certainly things you can do to better position yourself for it, but you ultimately can't be you can't control that. I had a writer ask me once, one of my students, if his script was like professional level. And first of all, I hate questions like that. But what I really hate is I don't think that there's such a thing. There are scripts that are well structured. There are, scripts that are enjoyable to read. There are all sorts of things about scripts, but I don't think there's such a thing as a professional level script. I work with professional screenwriters, screenwriters who've made lots and lots of money. And their, script, they may be very natural at certain things, but they're coming to me for a reason. They have things they need help with. And they also have things on, in a first draft that I am sometimes a little surprised a professional screenwriter would even, put in a script, because it's just not particularly delightful writing. What makes a professional screenwriter is there's a whole lot of luck involved. Yes, you should try to make your own luck, but there are a whole lot of things outside of your control.
That's interesting. So in the arts, for someone to give the advice, if you just keep trying, you keep outworking the next person, you'll make it, is almost a cruel
I think it is cruel.
statement. Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
it is cruel. It's just not, if you want to be a lawyer, yes. If you go to law school and you work hard enough at law school and you get a good internship and this and that, yes, you will probably be a successful lawyer if you work hard enough and don't have something out of the blue getting your way. That's just not true in the arts. There are so many things out of your control, and so I hate seeing people beat themselves up for it. And that's not to say don't pursue it. I'm all for people pursuing their dreams in the arts, but also to be aware that there's so many things outside of your control, and it's not a judge of your talent. It really isn't. People think that there's some sort of magical answer to who has talent and who doesn't. That's not how it works. There are people less talented than you who are making lots of money in the industry for whatever reasons. There are all sorts of things happening, and it's the decisions. It's not like a natural meritocracy. You are at the whims of a business you have no control over, right? And the decision making that happens in that business is not necessarily that sensible sometimes, right? Or it's ruled by all sorts of factors, like any business dealing with million and billion dollar products that. They're not looking for the most talented screenwriter, right? They might be looking for the screenwriter who is the easiest to work with. There are all sorts of things going on that are outside of your control. And I just wish I had recognized that when I was younger. I would have cost me a lot less pain. And it's something I really try to have other writers realize. Just there are things outside of your control. What you should do is find a way that you enjoy it, right? Hopefully you enjoy writing and you enjoy the process. You enjoy, and I urge writers to not just write, to find writers, we put ourselves in this horrible position of please read my screenplay. It's a horrible position we're putting ourselves. Nobody wants a needy person, right? That's what we are. We're in this, and that's the position we're in. And I encourage writers to stop putting themselves in that position, to instead find ways to create on their own. No, you can't create a $100 million movie on your own. But there are a lot of things you can do on your own. And there are ways to show the world you're creating stuff. Look at this person. Look at this person I found on YouTube doing this interesting web series. Look at this. Show the world you're not begging and waiting to be discovered. Because if you're going to wait to be discovered, or even if you're going to try hard to be discovered, you're probably not going to be discovered. But if you're trying to enjoy yourself, you're trying to create stories and find a way to share it with the audience, whether it's on YouTube or whatever, there are all sorts of ways, and you actually enjoy that process, and you enjoy that other people have able to see it in whatever format it is, or hear it, if you do an audio fiction podcast, right? Do things like that. Hopefully you're going to find that satisfying. Will you make a lot of money? Probably not. Maybe, but at least you're not sitting on your butt, feeling sorry for yourself that nobody read your script, or you didn't get anywhere in a script competition or things like that, that you are actively showing the world, I create stuff because I like creating stuff. I have interesting things to say, and you're not waiting for permission to do those things. Just do them. Do them.
What should a writer look for or consider when they're seeking a script consultant like yourself?
They should, first of all, make sure they're doing it for the right reasons. I think a lot of people misunderstand and think that we're gatekeepers, that we can get them an agent. I have a lot of famous clients, but I got to tell you something. Almost all of my famous clients were famous before they came to me. Right? What I can do, I can't get you an agent. I can make your script the best version it can be. That's what I do. I want to get it to a whole other level for you. And I also want for you to realize your vision. I heard someone say once that script consultation was about compromise. I could not disagree more. It's not about I'm not compromising with the writer. It's not. I'm not a factor in it. I am trying to help you achieve your vision, right? And if you're coming to me, obviously something's not working, and something is, just not effective. And so that's one of the reasons I don't do written consultations. That I mark up the script, but I actually do it orally because I want to talk to the writer. I want to find out what it is that they were going for that maybe got lost in translation, and help them achieve their vision. But if you're going to a consultant and you think that, especially paying for one script consultation, that's going to be enough to make you famous, I think you're going to a script consultant for the wrong reason. That's not what we should be. That's not what we're about. So good consultants are expensive, but just because someone's expensive doesn't mean that they are good. But people should be aware it's expensive. And very often I'm frustrated when someone's completely new and maybe they've never even taken a class, maybe they've never even read scripts, and they've written a screenplay. And I'm happy to help. I'll do what I can. I'm going to have a ton to teach them. They're going to learn a lot. But I wish they had done something like take a class. I have classes. I charge half as much for a 10-week class as I do for one script consultation. So there's a lot to learn. And I think it's helpful if people go in with some humility about it. And if you don't know much about it, I would before you invest in an expensive script consultant, see about taking a class where you can really learn a lot, where you can also have peers that you can work with and meet and maybe be able to do a writing group with before you invest in an expensive script consultant. But I'm in demand, and I charge accordingly, like anyone would. And there are different criteria to look at. I've been a script consultant and a screenwriting teacher for over 18 years, and as a professional. And then 15 years before that, I was a not professional who analyzed movies. And by analyzing movies, I don't mean I just watched a bunch of movies. I meant I was watching movies with a notebook, taking notes, for 15 years. So I've had a lot of experience with that. I've had a book that's, has a method nobody else is doing, that's doing well. I have things like that to offer. I don't have, by the way, fancy IMDb credits. Some people say you need to have a consultant who has, sold things. Well, I've sold scripts, but I don't know if everyone understands that not every script that's sold ends up on the IMDb, right? So if you want, if that's important to you to find someone who has sold some scripts, you can go for that. But keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean you're the best teacher. Just because you've sold some things, you may not know, that's not necessarily a repeatable skill you can teach. I ask people sometimes, who would you rather have as an acting teacher, Robert De Niro or Stella Adler, if she was still alive? And a lot of people are like, well, who's Stella Adler? First of all, right? Well, she was only, I think, in one movie and one small bit, but she was the acting teacher of Robert De Niro and so many other great actors, right? And so, just because someone is successful, that doesn't mean they necessarily know how to teach you things or to explain, or that they are the gateway to success. But that's a factor some people want to consider. And so that's something to look for, if that's, there are all sorts of things to consider when you're looking for a script consultant.
And what's happened with you and the Nutshell Technique book since, 5 years since we last met?
Yeah, thank you. So much has happened. Yeah, since my, Nutshell Technique, the video, I call it the Fat Tootsie video. It's the one, I think you've labeled it, this is how 99% of writers tell a story, and 270 1,000 people have seen it. It was exciting for me, closest to anything viral I've done. I think Fat Tootsie has become my brand, which I'm fine with. It's a great way to sum up what my method is, and I encourage folks to watch that video if they haven't seen that video before. But lots of exciting things have happened. My book has come out, and I have them here. My book has come out in Korean.
Oh, cool.
Italian. They did a pink cover for some reason,
yeah.
and they retitled it Breaking the Shell. I don't know why. And then Mandarin Chinese version. And so, and so that's been very exciting. And there's an audiobook version as well. And the book has been blurbed by some of my heroes, like Han Jin-woo, who was the Oscar-winning screenwriter of Parasite, and John Beckerman, who was the creator of Ed and was the head writer for David Letterman for a number of years, and Callum Green, who's the producer of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. And and so I'm pleased to see that my book has been, is industry standard in certain circles. As Han Jin-won said in his blurb on that, it's become something of a new Hollywood standard and is used at a lot of universities. And then meanwhile, my program has changed a little bit. I've now started during the pandemic, my classes, I have classes on Zoom now. And so I have students all over the world, which I love. And so I get a lot out of teaching, actually, and that's actually what's kept me, I think, really good as a script consultant and story consultant, and my ability to fix story. It's because I work with so many student stories, and my students are so dedicated. I love them. I have students all over Europe now, and so my class meets at 5 p.m. Pacific time. That is 2 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. For my students in Italy and Germany who take it. And I'm amazed at their dedication. I've recently added a daytime class because so the hours are a little bit better for European students as well as students in the U.S. who want to take a daytime class. And my script consultancy is going really well. I have a client whose movies have made $1.5 billion at the box office. I have a client who was nominated for an Oscar last year, and she won the BAFTA for screenwriting. And I should say my classes, actually, I have Emmy winners taking my classes. I have literary agents taking my class. Producers have been taking my classes. So all different levels of people and in the industry are taking them. So all those things have been going really well. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you. And your website is beautiful.
Oh,
and
thank
you can go on there and see some of the quotes too and some of what you offer. What is it about your teachings that helps screenwriters finish their screenplays?
Well, first of all, my method, again, is make sure that people know their endings, right? That they know the story. They know the big picture. They're not just diving in and writing and hoping that somehow a great ending is going to materialize. They've, first of all, figured it out using my nutshell technique at a bird's eye level so that they know that it works. They've got feedback from a class, and so it gives them all the confidence. Once, it's great. I love seeing it when people in the beginning are bringing in their story nutshells and they're struggling a little bit, and then as they start to finally figure it out, I'm thrilled, but I'm also thrilled to hear their classmates say, "Oh my God, now I totally see your story," right? And so now people have the confidence, because other people, we can all understand their story. When it's just one piece of paper, they can understand the story. And so they go and write it. They're probably not going to get stuck. And if they do get stuck, they have a class of people they can bring that up and we can talk about it, figure out what is it what did we not set up correctly? Because if you're getting stuck, that's what it means. I also have a policy that we don't look at incomplete scripts. So you have to finish the script if you want feedback in my classes. And so that is something, and matter of fact, I have a lot of alumni who repeat the class because I know that they see it as a way to have accountability, and they feel like they've wasted their money if they don't get a script by week 9, because we're not going to read it. And those writers, I have writers who've written literally 10 scripts because they've taken my class 10 times. And so, yeah, so that's how I'm going to help you, but if you get to the end of it, then you're going to get feedback from me and 9 other people as well.
And you've also ventured into co-writing a screenplay currently?
Yeah, I'm kind of going back into writing. I hadn't done writing really for years, and I am working on a few projects. It's, I'm as frustrated with my own stuff as I am that other people are with their stories. So it's a whole different skill set for me. Script consulting, fixing stories is so natural to me. Like it's really pretty easy. It's very clear to me. But with my own stuff, I'm like everybody else. I'm just as lost. I don't have somebody to help me fix my story. But it's been fun to put myself back into the writer's shoes, which I hadn't done for so long. And it's been a good experience too. It's been good. My student writers have expressed they appreciated my vulnerability in talking about going through some of the experiences I've had in dealing with writing again. Like it helps their confidence to hear, yeah, it was really frustrating when I put my script up for notes and I wasn't happy with the notes that came back. They were relieved to hear, that isn't something that goes away, that experienced people experience that too. And that I'm kind of in the same ballpark as they are, more or less, that, it's, there's no guarantee anything's going to happen, but it's been a really nice experience to get back into it. So I am dabbling a little bit. It's still my day job will always, I think, be script consulting and teaching. Like I said, that's something I have a pretty unique skill for. I love the idea that people would love my scripts. I don't know how unique I am. As far as I'm just not someone who generates tons of ideas, which I really think is something you probably want as a screenwriter, that you're constantly developing new things. I'm a little more just like everybody. I'm a little too precious, I think, with the things I work on. But it's been a really good experience for me.